Okay, so welcome everybody to our What Do We Need COP26 to Be? I'm Henry Brocklebank from Sussex Wildlife Trust, and we're really pleased to welcome you all to our series of webinars for nature's sake. So we're going to be discussing COP26 in this first session, and then in the next two sessions, we're going to be trying to bring some of the issues of COP26 back to Sussex. What do these issues mean on a Sussex level? So we've got a series of speakers this evening representing our youth, arguably the people that we should and are all doing this work for, and Kathryn Brown from the Royal Society of Wildlife Trust, who will give us a national perspective from the Wildlife Trust, and Martin Meadows, with many years of experience in UK climate policy sharing and insights. And first of all, some housekeeping. We'll be able to take some questions for Katheryn and Martin, and it will invariably be more questions than we can cover, I'm afraid, but please put these questions into the Q&A and we'll be able to pick up on some of these when we have time for questions. But first of all, I'll hand you over to Sussex Wildlife Trust Climate Action Lead, which is Matthew Bird, who will give us a brief synopsis of where we've got to regarding COP26 and where we are. Thank you.
Hi there. It's nice to see everyone here along the webinar, and it's great to talk about some of the work that we're doing. It's a really important time with COP26 coming up. So I just wanted to kind of just briefly explain what COP26 is and why I think it's important. And then just to give a very, very quick overview of some of the work that we're doing at the Sussex Wildlife Trust. I've been brought in as to lead on climate work. I've been working for about 20 years in climate change, sort of in local authorities mostly, led the South East Climate Change Partnership for quite a while. I live in Lewes. I'm very aware of some of the work that we're going to hear from Green United. So there's a lot going on, and it's all been kind of working towards this. It's called the Conference of Parties, but it's essentially the UN Global Climate Change Partnership, Climate Change Summit, where it's being hosted in Glasgow this year. So it's a real opportunity for people to kind of make sure that their issues are sort of front and foremost, and that governments around the world really hear the urgency that we think should be attached to the work that we've been doing and others have been doing over the years. So I think it's some people see it as a last chance saloon. I don't think it's quite that, but it really is the big opportunity to kind of put into practice all the things that have been sort of promised at the Paris Climate Summit in 2015. So, essentially trying to keep temperatures to within 1.5 degrees C. And Martin and Katheryn are going to really sort of outline the sort of detail of why that needs to happen. And I just wanted to kind of put these two pictures from this week, actually. So the first one is the floods in London, which are a fairly regular occurrence now, and it shows in practice the sort of more frequent extreme weather that we're experiencing, along with the hotter, drier summers and warmer, wetter winters. And so on that same day, on Monday, when those floods were occurring, some I think they're called Insulate Britain protesters were arrested, and they're described as crusties by the government. And I think there's not making a political point, but I think what this sets out is the kind of the big gulf between what is happening, what governments are saying and doing and reacting to, in terms of sort of people and the urgency with which people feel we need to act, and essentially I think what we're going to find through COP26 is you know, where that lands. And, you know, it's no more time for talk, really. It's time for, you know, those agreements to be set out, those plans for countries to be set out. So just wanted to very quickly give you an overview of the work that I've been doing with Sussex Wildlife Trust. I mean, the first thing, and this is something that all the wildlife trusts have been doing, is to calculate their carbon footprint. So along with others, we've carried out an exercise earlier this year, looked at our corporate carbon emissions in detail, and along with lots of others, actually found that, you know, you can see from this chart, livestock is the sort of overwhelming part of our footprint. Obviously transport and energy making up the rest of it. So, you know, that in a kind of nutshell, that sets out the sort of scale of the challenge for wildlife trusts, in that, you know, we're conservation organisations, so there's a lot of conservation grazing. So there's those ecological objectives that we want to meet as wildlife trust, but there's also no denying the greenhouse gas emissions that occur as a result of that. So, you know, there's some big issues to grapple with. And to that end, you know, we're putting together a climate change, a carbon reduction strategy and carbon action plan. And then just in terms of, you know, the landscapes and how they, you know, where they sit in the context of climate change, you know, and how resilient our landscapes are. This is just one example of a project that we're involved in called the Sussex Flow Initiative. So that really is around the natural flood management, you know, sort of mimicking beaver behaviour almost, and just, you know, looking at the resilience of our landscapes. So, you know, not only in terms of adapting to kind of, you know, more flooding, but in terms of what habitats can sequester and store, you know, in terms of carbon. So, and you might have heard of the Kelp project as well. So there's a lot of work going on around our landscapes as well. So that's just a really brief whistle-stop tour of some of the work that we've been doing. And, you know, later on with some of the other webinars coming up, we'll look at it in a bit more detail. So I'll hand back to Henry now.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And now that you've stopped sharing, then I'm really pleased to welcome John Parry from the Lewes Railway Lands Wildlife Trust. And he is going to introduce you to our two youth speakers, Leo and Evie, and give you a bit of context. Thank you, John. You're on mute, John. Thank you. Should be fine.
Thanks very much. Okay, and really I'm representing the University of Sussex really here, because I've been working with colleagues and with young people setting up something called Green United. And I wanted to just very quickly give a view of how this came about, and then we'll hand over to two wonderful young people in Lewes. It's emerged slowly from a Western Road primary school assembly in March 2019 by invitation of the head on the suggestion of Emma Montlake, who is on council at Sussex Wildlife Trust. And I thought, gosh, how do I go about this? And I just went for three things, really, that we're all in this together. It's not an us and them situation. I wanted to pull out the fact that one of the biggest threats, certainly in Lewes, was flooding from sea level rise, and then floated the idea of a Lewes environmental education strategy. Might that be worth doing? And this seemed to catch people's imaginations. Janet Barr, the mayor, was very welcoming and allowed us to use the council chamber where we had our first meeting. And then in July in 2019, young people met at Western Road. These were young people from various schools in Lewes. And then in the Linklater Pavilion, when I was running it, all the year 6 classes undertook a little survey, and we then coded those responses, putting numbers to what the young people were concerned about. And then you can collapse the codes and actually get a real feel of where their where their real concerns were. So 28% of comments were about school grounds and wildlife. 25 was on plastic, because that was very high in the media. It was when all the plastic in oceans came out, and David Attenborough and so on. And then 4, 5 and 6 on factual information and learning how to protest, but how to do it really well. And then 9% on growing food and food waste. So we then fed those codes and that result back to the original group of young people and adults who were concerned in this, and then working through at the end of 2019 and early in 2020, workshops were run. This was in my house, in fact, with those young people, working with colleagues from the university. And that then led to a big event at Priory School on the 12th of February 2020, where those young people then worked out that their key areas were school grounds, food in schools, transport around schools, and so on. And the mayor then, John Lamb, Councillor Lamb, he then was ready to have a big event where those young people would have a big ask of asking the local community in terms of time, talent and treasure or money to help them address their local concerns that they had articulated. And as we all know, COVID then struck, and it really pretty much knocked us, as it did for everybody, knocked us off course. But these young people, and there's a board now of about 15 of them or so, they have kept the project alive through Zoom meetings. We had one which was 110 people on it. They have kept it going. They've been amazing, really. And I'm now really absolutely delighted and very proud to introduce 2 of them who will take over now. They've got 45 seconds on 8 different projects that they're going to tell you about. So I'm going to hand over to, I think, Evie first of all, and then to Leo. So I'll stop sharing and hand over to Evie.
Thank you, John.
Okay, thanks, John. Sorry, something weird happened to my screen then. Leo, can you share the screen for the slides, please? Thanks. So we don't have the slides yet. Oh, actually we do now. So the first project I'm going to talk about is the Sussex University and Priory School Forest Food Gardens. One of the concerns raised by young people in Green United is knowing about and growing good food. 2 projects begun in 2020 at the University of Sussex and Priory School in Lewes will allow information and skills to be shared and exchanged between young people. There's a bigger garden at Sussex University, but at Priory School the area has a pond. By helping with these gardens, the pupils are learning about growing good food. The second project I'm going to talk about is Green on the Screen, which is the Environmental Filmmaker project. The young people had various concerns, such as the effects of palm oil on the environment, ocean plastic damage, and bees' role as pollinators. A group of us from schools in Lewes are making some short films about these issues. For instance, I'm helping make the one about plastic in the ocean. These films will be shown in November in the depot to coincide with the COP26 climate conference. The third project I'm going to talk about is food provision. The concern is, can school food be sourced sustainably? This is also a project I'm involved in, and we're trying to find ways to source more locally produced products as school snacks in sustainable packaging. The final project I'm going to talk about is road closure outside South River School. Teachers and pupils at the school express concerns about all of the cars outside of the school, and especially all the pollution they were causing. The County Council agreed to close the road for a while, and the air improved. However, It remains to be seen whether the initiative can last. Thank you very much. Now I will hand over to Leo.
Okay, thank you. No, I can't.
Thank you, Evie.
It's not letting me move the slides. There you go. Okay, so I will first be talking about improving school grounds. So some pupils were worried about the lack of biodiversity in school grounds. Western Road and Southover, which are right next to each other, are working together on a hedge planting scheme and a habitat monitoring project. They are being supported by local groups like Wildflower Lewes, Lewes Arboretum, and a local biologist and Clarion Future Finance. Pupils from the school are leading the project. Monitoring to inform action. Lots of the pupils in the group were worried about air pollution around schools in Lewes. There are lots of cars at school drop-off and pick-up times, and it can be very busy and noisy and polluted when we arrive at school. So on Clean Air Day this year at Western Road, which was my old school, we used some air pollution monitors which we could wear, which measured how much pollution we were exposed to before and during school drop-off and pick-up. The monitors showed pollution levels go up and down every few seconds, so we could see how much more polluted it got when cars started arriving and when a car was parked and had its engine on right next to us. That week, we also had an assembly about air pollution and child health, and we all had a look at the air quality data from the monitoring and could see that we would breathe in much cleaner air if we had fewer cars at pickup and drop off each day. The next steps will be to think about how that can happen and for the monitors to be borrowed by other schools in Lewes so they can do the same. Plastic-free schools. Paul Navarro from Western Road is starting up a petition and wants to get schools to join the Plastic-Free Schools campaign. The aim will be to cut out single-use plastics from school food. It sounds like a really great campaign by Surfers Against Sewage. And the idea is that school pupils are empowered to create their own campaign against plastic in schools. Food waste in schools. As you can probably imagine, the schools create a lot of food waste. Schools in the UK produce about 80,000 tonnes of food waste each year, and half of this is fruit and vegetables. And it has been estimated that if food waste was a country, it would be the third highest emitter of the greenhouse gases after the US and China. So one project is looking into whether this food waste can be composted. 2 councillors are looking into this. Councillor Adrian Ross and Wendy Maples, and a pupil from Lewes Old Grammar School is leading on this from pupil and school side. Okay, thank you. My bit's done, I think. Should I stop sharing?
Yeah, if you stop sharing your screen, but wow, Leo and Evie, just brilliantly spoken. Thank you so much. I think both of them really mature, brilliant presentations. And it really demonstrates just how much we need our global leaders to steer our shared planetary ship through COP26. So that's a really good illustration of the sorts of things that young people are thinking about. So thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it. So we're going to move on now to Kathryn Brown from the Royal Society of Wildlife Trust. So each of the wildlife trusts, there is 46 county scale wildlife trusts, of which Sussex Wildlife Trust is one, even though we're 2 counties, obviously. We all are part of a a kind of umbrella organisation, which is the Royal Society of Wildlife Trust, so that we have our local voice and we also have our national voice. So Kathryn Brown, please introduce yourself, and thank you very much for joining us. You should be able to share your screen.
Thank you very much, Henry. And yeah, it's lovely to be here and to see you all. And just to give you a little bit of an update on what's happening as Henry says, in the central team at the Royal Society of Wildlife Trusts. Hopefully you can see my title slide, so somebody can just let me know if that's showing.
Yeah, it all looks fine.
Great. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes just talking you through sort of where we are, and then the Wildlife Trust collective position going into COP26 and what we'd like to see. And then just what we're actually doing at COP26 as well, which you can all sign up to receive updates on. So some of this has already been touched on by Matthew at the beginning, and this is a really useful graphic, which the source is at the bottom. It's called the Climate Action Tracker. And what it shows is it gives an update month by month, or roughly every quarter, on what all of the different countries of the world, what all of their global commitments on reducing emissions adds up to in terms of global temperature rise by the end of the century. So it's a really great way of just getting a bit of a summary of all of these news stories that we keep hearing all the time about different countries' pledges. And what it's showing, this is the May 2021 update, so this is actually the most recent one that we've got. If we look at the implementation of current policies by different countries around the world, at the moment, this is the blue rectangle in the middle. What you can see is the Paris Agreement goal, which is what we're trying to aim for as an outcome of COP26, is the 1.5 degree line. The Paris Agreement aims to keep global temperature rise below 2 degrees, but what we can see with the implementation of current policies is that the range of outcomes is likely to be between around 2 and 4 degrees. So we're still way above that 2 degree line on the basis of current policies. The pledges and targets, which includes the pledges that are being made now by different countries in advance of COP26, does bring us down somewhat, but still not below really that 2 degree line yet. So it just gives you a sense of what's left to do, you know, how much more there is still to do on global climate change mitigation. And to put that in context of why it's so important and why we have the sense of urgency about the COP that's coming up this year, this is just an illustration really of some of the unprecedented extreme weather events that we're seeing globally and in the UK as well. And I quite wanted to put this one up because obviously a lot of you will be very well aware of the risks from flooding where you live across Sussex. This one is showing you the risks from extreme heat, and this is 6 consecutive days from the heat wave last summer in August 2020. And obviously, if you look at where Sussex is, it's quite often in this purple area. And those purple regions were showing temperatures that were 10 degrees above the long-term average during that heat wave. So this was a fairly unprecedented event that had a lot of negative impacts. And we're seeing these unprecedented weather events growing even at the climate change we've had so far, which is just over 1 degree of warming. I just wanted to include in relation actually to one of the questions that's already been asked by Michael about reducing emissions, but also increasing carbon sequestration in our natural environment. This just gives you a sense of the scale of what's needed in the UK to do that. So this is actually the Climate Change Committee's analysis of our total national emissions in 2019 and sequestration, which is that tiny little green strip below the zero line, and where we need to get to by 2050 to reach net zero, which means that the emissions above the zero line and the sequestration below are equal, so they're cancelling each other out. There's obviously a huge effort that's needed to reduce emissions, but there's also an effort that's needed to increase sequestration to balance out those emissions that are very hard to reduce. And we can come back to that in the Q&A as to how that applies to the Wildlife Trust as well. And I know Matthew was putting an answer into that question as well, but it just gives you a sense of the scale, I thought, of the challenge. But on the other side of the coin, as well as reducing emissions, we do need to think about building resilience to that climate change, which is now inevitable. So we are expecting at least around another 0.5 degree of warming by 2050 globally and in the UK. And Matthew just wanted me to put up this slide, which shows the sort of top key risks from climate change to the UK, and the fact that 4 of the 8 key risks that were identified in the latest national assessment are about the natural environment. So risks to the viability and diversity of terrestrial and freshwater habitats and species, soil health, natural carbon stores, and agriculture and forestry productivity as well. The other 4 are more about the economy and people and public health, but actually also have really key links to the natural environment as well, particularly the one on risks to human health from overheating. So going back to that slide I just showed you with the weather maps for the UK, increasing green space in urban areas is a really, really good way of reducing the risk to people and their health from overheating, as well actually as flood risk. So it really does cut across all of these key risks to the UK from climate change. So I've been asked just to give you a sense of what the Wildlife Trust's collective position is going into COP26. And there is an announcement coming out tomorrow, so do look out for that. I think we might even be on the Today programme talking about it in the morning if anyone's up that early. But there's a whole raft of things that are being published tomorrow about our collective position and what we'll be doing in advance of COP26. But we really just have one goal, which is to put nature recovery at the heart of the increased ambition on climate change in the UK and globally, and on both mitigation, which is obviously reducing emissions, and adaptation, which is about building resilience. So that's the kind of overarching goal that we'd like to see out of the COP. What does that really look like in terms of the UK presidency's role, and also what we'll be calling for as we sort of join the negotiations at the end of the month? So we'd like to see the UK presidency really leading the way on getting engagement for that scaled up ambition, that temperature graph, the thermometer graph I showed you, trying to keep that 1.5 degree goal within reach. And the UK needs to show its own ambition, as well as kind of collating all of the pledges together and trying to drive forward action in different countries as well. So that's the first thing. And we really want to see the protection of the UK's natural environment as a key part of that. The second aim is really about finance. So there's going to be a lot of discussion about finance, particularly the $100 billion pledge, which developed countries made a few years ago to developing countries to help them to tackle climate change, including improving their resilience. And that still hasn't been met yet. So that's going to be a really big topic for discussion as well, including the UK's contribution through the International Climate Fund, which is a £3 billion pledge over 5 years. And finally, as I said, we want to see the UK showing domestic leadership as well as its leadership in diplomacy globally. And what that really means is we want to see them sort of walking the talk, if you like, on both mitigation and adaptation. So we're expecting a new net zero strategy to come out from the government in the next few weeks. And we want to see that, to make sure, we want to see within that government really are putting in place the scale of action that's needed to reach net zero by 2050. We'd like to see a much more ambitious set of national adaptation plans, which are next due out in 2023. And we want to see all of the nature targets and the kind of recommendations that the Wildlife Trust have been making over the last few years to start to see those implemented. So including the 30 by 30 target, which I'm sure many of you know about, restoring 30% of UK land and sea for nature by 2030. There's lots around that, around natural carbon stores, including targets for peatland restoration, for example, making sure we see this legally binding state of nature target in the Environment Bill for England, which is in there now, so we hope it stays in there, and enabling people to take action themselves, whether that's through providing finance, education, public awareness. We've just heard about some great examples of that, and thinking about other wider issues around wellbeing, such as a natural health service as well. So that was all I was going to say, just as a brief summary of the issues, but very happy to take a couple of questions. Or Henry, we can wait till the end, obviously, if you'd prefer as well.
We have got time for a few questions now, so I'll give a chance for people to type questions into the Q&A. But in the meantime, we've had a really good question. What is the one thing we can do to help today?
That's a really good question. I don't think I'm the only one that should be answering that.
Yeah, no, I think we'll open that to you and also others of the panel, what they think as well.
Yeah, so thank you, David. One of the things we'll be publishing tomorrow is an updated, which I'm quite excited about actually, is an updated set of personal actions, which has been on the Wildlife Trust website for quite a while. So you may have seen it. There's a whole set of different actions that you could take in your house, in your garden to help nature's recovery. And we've added a whole load of climate change actions to those pages as well. So we've done a top 8 actions that you can take to reduce your own emissions and to boost your own resilience as well. So it's not just thinking about net zero, but also thinking about addressing flood risk, water scarcity and overheating. So I would say to come tomorrow, go and have a look at that list, and you can choose from a plethora of things rather than just the one thing. I mean, the Wildlife Trust would always say, write to your MP is the top thing you can do to try and make sure that this issue really is seen as a priority issue for the public. So obviously that would be my one, but please go and look at the 20 or so that we're publishing tomorrow as well.
Do any of the other panelists want to add anything of the one thing? I will. Oh, Martin.
Thank you. It's actually to back up what Kathryn was saying there. I think basically what people are doing now by coming to this webinar is probably one of the best things they could do. You need to care. You need to care about this issue. You need to engage with it, and you need to learn about it to find out more about it. And that's what we're doing here today. I'd say very much talk to your MP, talk to your councillors, write to them, tell them that you care, tell them that it matters to you, and ask them what they're doing about it and why they're not doing enough, which is what I'll talk about later. And talk to your family and friends about it as well, this issue. And I think, that's what I'd say, but most of all, care and engage with it.
Thank you. Sage advice. Matthew, I think you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely agree with all of that. I mean, any decision maker, whoever it happens to be, whether it's your teacher or your or your local council or whoever, I mean, you've just got to push them. But I think the one that I keep hearing about a lot, which I think is really good, is changing your bank account. So where you put your money, where you spend, where you invest, because there's a lot of banks out there and companies who are still investing in fossil fuels. So I think you can make some big decisions count there.
Okay, I'd like to add to that doing a carbon reduction plan for your business is a raw and brutal experience when you really look at the emissions of what you're doing in order to deliver the work that you do for your business. And for any of the participants today that are associated in any way with a business, it's their business, they work for a business, make sure that your business is putting in place a carbon reduction plan with real integrity, that they are really looking at how they are going to be net zero as soon as possible. They're challenging pieces of work to do, but they're absolutely critical. And I'm sure the same goes for Evie and Leo to look at what their school is doing, and I know you are, to look at the reductions in emissions from your own organisations. Okay, I've got another question coming up in Q&A. Just scroll down. Can the slides with activities identified be shared with other schools in Sussex and beyond, perhaps? It's great work, says Claire B. So I think, John, that's one for you. Are you doing anything to share this amazing work of Green United with other schools across Sussex?
Apologies. Not yet is the answer. It's still fledgling, actually. The board is still getting themselves together. They've got monthly meetings. And I think probably by the summer of next year, the young people may feel that they've got something that can be shared with other schools. So no, we're just feeling our way. But Evie might want to, or Leo might want to add something to that. I don't know. It's up to them.
Okay. Well, thank you. I've got a question for Kathryn, which is taking off your RSWT hat and putting on your personal Kathryn Brown hat. I know you've been involved in this sector for a long time. What's the real thing, the litmus test for you for COP26 that you really want to see?
Well, that's a good question, Henry. So yeah, I've been doing COPs for quite some years. So I used to go to them in the early 2000s, which shows my age a bit, when I worked at DEFRA, actually, at the same time as Martin, strangely enough. I think the litmus, so there's, if I can have more than one thing would be seeing and we're starting to see it actually, a real change in the level of ambition on mitigation. not necessarily that we will see enough pledges to get to 1.5 degrees, but that we will see these big announcements coming out that we've seen in recent weeks, like we will stop investing in fossil fuel sources of energy, we will stop building coal-fired power stations, etc. That's really important. The other thing I'd really love to see is much more attention being paid to adaptation and nature and carbon reduction together. You cannot do any one of those things on their own. And for me personally, mainly because I've worked on adaptation much more than mitigation for the last few years, although in my new role, obviously I'm doing both. They're very much seen as 3 separate things, and that's never going to work. You have to do those things together in an integrated way. So seeing some really good announcements that think about the whole system, the global system, and tackling the nature and the climate crises together would be a fantastic outcome, I think. We're on mute, Henry.
You're on mute, Henry.
Sorry. I'm just going to follow that up with another question, Kathryn, which is, in terms of adaptation, you've been in the Wildlife Trust movement for a little while now. What, don't feel you have to say it's Sussex, we're not expecting that, but what is the best demonstration you've seen of adaptation that's really inspired you within the Wildlife Trust movement that we, as participants in this, can go and Google as soon as this meeting's over?
What's really surprised me, actually, and I've been really delighted by, and actually I've only been here for 2 months, but this has already been a really good outcome, is the recognition that we do have to change, that conservation actually does need to change because the climate is changing, and that all of the trusts just understand that and are ready to engage and have a discussion on that about what we want our natural environment to look like as the climate changes going into the future. I thought that's really inspiring that everybody is ready to talk about that topic. A really good example I've seen is actually from Somerset Wildlife Trust, because they've been pioneering an adaptation pathways approach, which goes from a kind of, there's a framework you can use, which goes from kind of a position where you're trying to protect what you have and stop it from changing, which is called resist, up to a position where you're allowing change to happen, but kind of managing that change and trying to transition your reserves and your different sites and assets to a new state, which is quite a new way of looking at adaptation. And it's a very good way of doing it in the natural environment and in a conservation setting. So they've got some really interesting work about adapting the levels, the Somerset levels, that would well be worth having a look at.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Well, in that case, thank you to Kathryn, and please carry on putting questions into the Q&A. And I'd now like to invite Martin Meadows to take the stage, so to speak, and yeah, tell us what you'd like COP26 to bring.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to be giving a very big picture, sort of global overview of what we need to see from COP26 in terms of tackling climate change. So I'm going to start with where we started from at the Paris Agreement in 2015. That was an unprecedented moment where all world leaders came together, and nearly every single world leader agreed that climate change was a serious threat to humanity's future and must be tackled. And they agreed they made political agreements on temperatures that the world should not go above by the end of the century. They chose 2 degrees as the very sort of worst, the very top level that it mustn't go above, because it was simply too dangerous to go beyond 2 degrees by the end of the century. And they said that the world really should be aiming to stay within 1.5 degrees, because even though the impacts of climate change would be very serious and dangerous at 1.5 degrees, it was felt that the world could somehow, if it worked together, manage that situation and still, hopefully, still thrive. And so that's what was agreed in Paris. At the time of Paris, the way they said that they'd go about this is basically the world needs to cut its greenhouse gas emissions that cause global warming. And the science says that they need to be cut radically and very fast, and have to reach about 0, so a net 0 by about the middle of this century. and the world leaders put together pledges, what are called pledges or effectively promises, what each country would do to achieve that overall aim for the world. At the time of the Paris Agreement, they didn't, what they were pledging was nowhere near enough. So they agreed that every 5 years, they'd look again at those pledges and try and increase the ambition to make sure that the world stayed on track or became on track to stay within 1.5 degrees. And that's why COP26 is so important. It's because it's the first time the world has got together since Paris to do this process of looking at increasing ambition. So I'm now going to show you where we are, what's happened since Paris and where we're going as things currently stand. So this chart shows you here on the left, this is global carbon dioxide emissions per year. Carbon dioxide is by far the most important greenhouse gas. It's the one that really needs to be cut if we're to meet the Paris goals. The black line is historic emissions. That's what the world is actually emitting every single year. As you can see, the trend is very strongly upwards. That Paris was in 2015. This trend remained upwards after Paris. There was a cut last year because of the COVID pandemic, quite a radical cut. Now that looks promising, not for the right reasons, of course, but that trend unfortunately isn't going to continue. The evidence is that the world emissions are already bouncing back and will probably be around what they were in 2019, in 2021. So they're not going down. The purple line here is what countries have put in place in terms of their policies and their stated policies that they will actually do to cut carbon dioxide emissions. And this is looking at the impact, the total effect of all the world's policies to cut emissions that they put in place or will promise to put in place. And as you can see, that doesn't look at all good. That means carbon dioxide emissions will stay about the same as we go through the century. And that brings us to what Kathryn was talking about. We're looking at temperatures as if things carry on roughly as they are. And that's if these policies are successful and implemented. We're looking at temperatures by the end of the century of around about 3 degrees. And basically that would be disastrous. That is really beyond which the world can manage and adapt to. The green line is the pathway of carbon dioxide that we need to be on to keep within 1.5 degrees, the Paris ambition or goal of 1.5 degrees. And as you can see, there's a massive gap between those two things. That's the gap in 2030. What countries are bringing forward in their pledges is promises to 2030. They don't have to make promises beyond 2030 under the Paris Agreement, but that's the gap in 2030. The gap in 2050 is quite obvious. This green line is informed by science. This is what scientists say we need to be on to have a reasonably good chance meeting 1.5 degrees. And that's a cut of 50% in carbon dioxide emissions by 2030 compared to 2010, and to be pretty much at zero by 2050. So countries have already started to make pledges for COP26. The European Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States have made their pledges. So the United Nations, which is running the meeting and this whole process, is able to add up those pledges and see where we're going. And that's the blue band here. The United Nations published its results last week. That's what countries have currently put on the table for COP26 in terms of what they're promising to do in the future by 2030. Really, it's very little change from where they are now. We're still waiting for pledges from China and India, two very major players in this, very big emitters. We're hoping that they'll bring along pledges that will start to move that line downwards. But basically COP26 really we need a lot more to happen in COP26 and afterwards. And remember, these are only promises, they're not actual action. So what is it that needs to change? What are we actually talking about here? This chart shows where global greenhouse gas emissions come from and what's producing them. And the red section there is energy. So that's the world's use of energy, and that produces about 3/4 of the world's greenhouse gas emissions that cause global warming. Agriculture and land, that's how we grow our food, is about just under 20%. Land means chopping down trees, deforestation, and that contributes there. Direct emissions from industry, from chemicals manufacturer and cement manufacturer is responsible for about 5%, and waste is responsible for about 3%. So it's really about energy. It's about the way the world uses its energy. How do we use our energy? Well, it's in about 4 chunks, and this is for most countries, industrialized countries in the world. About 25%, a quarter, is on transport, how we move around, and the great majority of that comes from private car use, but also flying, shipping, trains, buses. About a quarter comes from buildings, how we heat and cool buildings. About a quarter comes from electricity generation, and that's a gas-fired power station in the United Kingdom. And then the remaining amount is really from the products and services we use, the stuff we consume, the stuff we buy, the stuff we use in our everyday lives, our food, our computers, our white goods, everything we buy and use, what we consume. So that's really, it's about energy, and it's about those things that we do in the world. So what's the problem? Well, it's the burning of fossil fuels. It's because 84% of the world's energy is provided by fossil fuels, and when they're burnt, they produce carbon dioxide that causes global warming. They also produce other gases that cause air pollution and harm people's health. This is the world's annual energy use on the side here, and here's the years from 1965 to 2020. And as you can see, dominated by the fossil fuels, oil, coal and gas. We're hoping that it looks like coal might be beginning to level off, but the trends on oil and gas are still very strongly upwards. Again, there was this dip last year because of the COVID pandemic, but we already know that is going to resume and carry on back to where it was for this year. These are the cleaner fuels down at the bottom in the brighter colours. They're the ones that don't produce carbon dioxide. We need a lot more of those to provide our energy. We've got bioenergy, hydro, nuclear power, wind, solar and others. And you can see that the growth in those, and some of them are growing, which is good news, is nowhere near enough. And still the fossil fuels keep growing. So now to focus in on the United Kingdom, what is it we need to be looking at here? United Kingdom is really very typical of most industrialized countries. There's nothing much different about us. This is where our energy use is, where our greenhouse gas emissions come from. 27% is from transport, the way we move around. 20% or so is from electricity production. These 2 sectors, the green and the yellow, are our buildings energy. That's mainly for heating in this country. We've got then agriculture in orange, and land. The other is mainly land use, the way we use land. That's how we manage trees, forests and our soils. And of course, these sectors, the orange and the green up here, although small for the United Kingdom, matter, as we saw very much for the Wildlife Trust, because it's a land manager and manages livestock. And this is where most of the emissions come from for the Wildlife Trust. So different organisations will have different priorities, but this is a pitch for the United Kingdom. And the sources of our energy in the United Kingdom is very much the same as for the rest of the world. We rely very much on fossil fuels, and that's not changing much. That stays about the same for the past few years. Over 80% of our energy comes from fossil fuels, a bit, 7% from bioenergy, which in itself does produce carbon dioxide. Nuclear power, which doesn't produce carbon dioxide, is 7%. So these brighter colour sectors are all the cleaner fuels that don't produce carbon dioxide. Wind was 3% in 2019 of our total energy use. These tiny sectors that I haven't labelled, but there is, that orange one is solar power, and that blue one is other sources of energy like hydro and tidal. So we're hugely reliant on fossil fuels in this country, and that must change very quickly. To give you an idea of the sort of the rate and the scale of the change for this country, for us to make a fair contribution to meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement, we must reduce carbon dioxide emissions from our energy system. And this has been worked out by the Tyndall Centre at the University of Manchester. They need to reduce by 80% in total by 2030, and that's compared to 1990. They need to be reduced, eliminated completely in about 15 years' time. And to give you an idea of the rate of change, we're looking at about a 13% per year reduction in carbon dioxide emissions from energy use. And to give you an idea of where we are on that, since 1990, we've reduced our carbon dioxide emissions from energy, well, for the whole country, but mainly from energy, by around about 1 to 2% a year. And that trend has remained steady, and that's what we're still on. There was a change last year, of course. Emissions went down by about 9%, but that was due to the lockdown and the sheltering that happened around COVID. Again, that's due to resume this year back to more normal levels. So even though for the wrong reasons of COVID, we achieved a reduction of 9%, we need to achieve more than that every single year. So that's the sort of scale of change we're looking at. So just to summarize, it's mainly about energy use, and it's mainly about transport, electricity, buildings, and the stuff we use and consume. And all that has to radically change in the next 10 to 15 years or so. So I'll leave you with that. We're on COP26 is part of a road. It's not an end in itself. We're going to have to be tackling this problem, this challenge for decades, if not centuries. And as Kathryn was saying, as you've seen, it looks unlikely that we are really going to achieve 1.5 degrees unless something really radical happens. So adaptation, resilience to the changed climate are going to be absolutely crucial if we're to thrive in the future. So thank you very much. I'll finish there.
Thank you very much, Martin. We've got some really good questions, actually. So I'll just start off with a question from Nick Mills. When COP26 is over, where's the best place to see a summary, hopes versus results?
Shall I?
Yeah, no, Martin, sorry, I was looking at you, but remember we're on Zoom, you can't see me looking at you.
I'll just have a quick go at that. I mean, yeah, there's going to be a lot of news around COP26, and there will be sort of these really big announcements made, if it's going well, about what's happening, about cutting, hopefully, coal use, about what countries are going to be doing. All of that, what you want to look out for is numbers and specific facts and figures about actually what will be the reduction in emissions that's going to happen, because that's all that actually matters. It is actually quite hard to get hold of that information in real time, but the United Nations will be on their website. There's a COP26 website. It's definitely worth looking at that to keep up to date with things. The climate tracker that Kathryn talked about, they are extremely good at sort of analysis and providing numbers, very objective analysis of what happens. So I really recommend keeping an idea on that and perhaps looking at their tweet. I'm sure they'll be tweeting about it. I would recommend looking at sort of, if you can find scientists, climate scientists, energy experts, find them on Twitter, have a look at what they're saying, because it's really, there's going to be a lot of politics and a lot of rhetoric, but what you want to know is facts. So that's what I'd say.
So could you tell us who is your go-to climate scientist for Twitter?
I have a few, but I'm a real follower of Kevin Anderson. He provided those blue arrows you saw me talk about.
Oh yeah, that's Kevin Climate.
Yeah, Kevin Climate. He's very, very realistic. He really tells it how it is. So he's definitely one. But I'd say Climate Tracker is one I use a great deal, which Kathryn also taught. That was that thermometer Kathryn put up. And I'm sure they'll be, tweeting and giving analysis during COP26.
Henry, can I just add something to that as well? So just to say as well that we will be doing a daily update from COP. So Craig Bennett and I are going to be doing a daily show, which I think will only be 10 to 15 minutes per day. So quite short, but we'll be bringing you kind of all the latest, what's really going on at COP, which can be quite hard to decipher from all the written material. So I don't think I can put stuff in the Q&A because I'm a panelist, but if you all go to just wildlifetrust.org/COP26, that's where all the material is being housed, and there's a sign up at the bottom to register for all of those daily updates. So that's a good way of doing it as well. But usually, I mean, the BBC always do a really good roundup of what's really happened and what it means at the end of COP, and you'll see that through a lot of the media as well. So I'm sure there won't be a shortage of different places to go to have a look at the outcomes.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I know Sussex Wildlife Trust will do daily links to the RSWT updates, RSWT TV. Matthew, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I was just the last comment that Kathryn made. I was just going to say the same thing. I mean, I think there's going to be no shortage of information and summaries, and it's actually going to be a case of how to sift through the noise and some stuff coming through. I mean, ultimately, we just want world leaders to actually, agree those sort of promises that were made, and I think. At the moment, the omens are not fantastic. So I think that's where the sort of pressure for some of these more sort of local asks is really important. I think it's actually putting pressure on national leaders, irrespective of the outcome of COP26 on a global scale.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. I'm going to go to a question from Brenda, which is get straight to the point. This is one really for Kathryn and for Martin. What if Brazil keeps burning like forests? What does that mean for the rest of the achievements that other countries may or may not be making?
It's a difficult one to call because the science around deforestation in the Amazon is very uncertain. So the Amazon, Brenda, I'm sure you know this, but the Amazon plays a really key role in the global climate system. So it regulates a lot of what we see in terms of rainfall patterns. So if you start to remove that, you do get some quite, we would expect to get some quite extreme changes in the global climate, as well as losing that carbon sink, which has been there. And actually we're starting to see that already with Amazon deforestation, that it's flipping from being a sink of emissions to a source, or it will at some point. What it means for what we do, I mean, it would mean more for adaptation. So adaptation isn't just about a gradual change as things kind of change on a linear basis. We would actually expect things could change very suddenly. And we have to be prepared to do whatever we can to build resilience to those sorts of very uncertain, sudden changes. I don't think it changes what the UK is doing on mitigation. So the UK has already got a net zero target. And as Martin was saying, we're not on track to meet that net zero target. So that remains as relevant in any future situation really as it does now.
We've got one final question about global leaders, but before we do that, this is just a quick question for Kathryn and Martin. Who are the countries that are really doing brilliantly, and who are the countries that are really lagging? Like literally just name the countries, the good and the bad.
So if you go to the Climate Action Tracker, it gives you a list of the good and the bad countries, which is really helpful. So I would say go back to that link and have a look. I think there are only 2 countries, and I wish I could name them off the top of my head, but I don't want to attempt it in case I get it wrong. I think there are only 2 or 3 who have Paris compliant mitigation strategies. So they're sort of given the green light. There's a lot that are kind of in the amber area, and that includes the UK, where the pledge is good, but the implementation still needs to get there. So do go and have a look at that and see what you think. I mean, on adaptation, the Netherlands are fantastic on adaptation, and they do a lot of kind of systems-based thinking and a lot of innovation on building resilience, particularly for flooding, but for other risks as well. So we always hold up the Dutch as a kind of system to aspire to, if you like, on adaptation.
Thank you. We just have been www.carbonbrief.org is also a good source of factual information, says Diana Wilkins. Thank you, Diana. And I will leave the last question to Mike Davis and direct it to Martin. Do global leaders show any indication that they really understand the calamitous effects of the predicted climate change based on their current pledges?
Wow, that's a great question.
There's and 1 minute, and only 1 minute to answer.
Right. Well, in short answer is no. They have made promises. The Paris Agreement suggests that they accept the science of global warming and the disastrous pathway we're on if we carry on as we are. But their actions don't match it. They're just not doing what's necessary. And this is really, I don't have the answer to that, but it's a fact that they're not behaving as if that they understand or know. Well, they understand and know the science, but they're not behaving as to what the science says they need to be doing. And it's not about science. I guess it's about politics. And that's, yeah, I can't help that. I can't answer that about politics.
Well, we have to stop here, I'm afraid, which I think we could probably carry on answering questions for quite a while yet. But thank you so much to our speakers. But sorry, Kathryn and Martin, but especially Evie and Leo, thank you so much for joining us, and for John for organising that. Very much appreciated. It's been really, really informative. We've got 2 more webinars coming up where we're going to bring some of these issues onto a Sussex level. We're going to look at what adaptation and mitigation means on Sussex level, look at coastal issues, terrestrial issues, look at what carbon storage in the natural environment, what are the real issues going on there. So, and we find out a little bit more about tree planting, not tree planting, natural regeneration, find out a bit more about all of it. So please come and join us for those webinars, which are next week and the week after. And in the meantime, I'm really sorry, I don't know how to turn all the microphones back on so everyone can give our speakers a round of applause. So you've just got me giving a round of applause and saying on behalf of everybody here, thank you very much indeed. And good night. See you next time.